The phrase, the fit of the model with the data, is often heard in regression. A basic distinction is made between a good fit of the model with the data and a poor fit of the model with the data. Goodness of fit concerns how well the model explains or predicts variance on the outcome variable measure. So let's deconstruct it. So here we have this phrase, the fit of the model with the data. Now let's take it backwards. And let's ask, okay, well, what is the data? Okay, what is the data? Then we'll ask, okay, well, what is the model? So what is the model? And then we'll ask, well, what is meant by the fit? So the fit. And we got each one of those discussed. What is the data? What is the model? What is the fit? Then we'll put it all together as to what is meant by the phrase, the fit of the model with the data. That is the effort here. So, the fit of the model with the data. Focus now on the data. What is meant by the data? Because we got a lot of data here. We got all sorts of scores on the predictive variable measures. We've got scores on the outcome variable measure. We got all sorts of data. So what is meant by the data? And I mean that specifically within the phrase, the fit of the model with the data. Within that phrase, what is meant by the data? It's a rhetorical question, so provided some answer here. Within that phrase, the fit of the model with the data are the values collected from the outcome variable measure. These are the actual observed values or scores collected from persons in the sample after they complete the measure. The data are these observed values, which are persons' actual scores on the outcome variable measure. If, for example, the outcome variable is organizational commitment, then organizational commitment must be measured in some way. If there are, let's say, 100 people in your sample, then you would give a measure of organizational commitment to each person to complete, along with the predictive variable measures as a stack of measures, do it the old school way. Each person's score, so our focus here is on the outcome variable measure, each person's score on the outcome variable measure is an observed value on the measure. And these observed values are the data. So you have your outcome variable measure, you have the actual observed values or scores on that measure. That's what is meant by the data. So now I have a non-rhetorical question to ask you. So someone tell me your best go here, without looking back on the previous slide, if you have the PowerPoint in front of you. What is meant by the data? Within the phrase, the fit of the model with the data, what is meant by the data? Say it louder so I can hear.
Observed values
Right. That's right. So it's the actual scores people got on that outcome variable measure. Their actual scores. Excellent. And that becomes the standard against which we compare the predicted scores coming out of the model. So that becomes the standard against which we compare the predicted scores coming out of the model. All right. So now that phrase, the fit of the model with the data, the model. What is meant by the model? The model is the set of predictor variables, otherwise known as independent variables, that you are testing. The model is the set of predictor variables, otherwise known as independent variables, that you are testing. Embedded within the regression equation, you are testing the set of predictor variables together in combination for its ability to predict scores on the outcome variable measure. For its ability to predict scores on the outcome variable measure. Scores on the predictor variable measures represent information. Represent information that you have about persons in your sample. And you are testing how well you can predict person scores on the outcome variable measure based on this information. Based on this information. A model is comprised of some number of predictor variables of your choosing. Choose well, and you'll have a good predictive model, which is what this is all about here when we're running regression. The model makes a prediction. Oh, if our lives could only be as straightforward as that of a model. The model wakes up in the morning and does a big stretch. And when you do that in the morning, you're probably thinking of a whole day's list of things to do, whole to-do list, one thing after the next, after the next, after the next, all these different things that you've got to do. Not the model. The model does one thing. The regression equation does one thing all day long. Predicts. It predicts. It's a prediction machine. So the model makes a prediction based on the information you've fed into it in terms of those predictor variables. You know, I think about this model sometimes. Sometimes I feel for the model because I'm thinking, you know, the model makes a prediction and it's like totally dependent on the researcher to feed it good information for making predictions. So if you got a thoughtless researcher who just throws predictor variables in there of whatever sort, the model really wants to make good predictions. I'm going to say that it does. I'm saying it has some agency, but it can't do it if it doesn't have predictive variables that are related to the outcome variable and can have something to say about it. So the model really likes to make predictions. All it does is make predictions, but it's dependent on the researcher to give it good information by which to make good predictions. And that's those predictive variables that are included in the model. So the model makes a prediction. It predicts each person's score on the outcome variable measure based on the person's scores on the predictor variable measures, or on that particular information that we collect about people. So the basic question of regression is, how good of a job does the model do at predicting the actual observed values, scores, on the outcome variable measure? So each person in the sample has two values on the outcome variable measure. The actual observed value from the measure in which you entered into the data set and the predicted value from the model, which you can ask SPSS to put into the data set, like we did earlier. So each person in the sample has two values on the outcome variable measure. The actual observed value from the measure, the score they actually got on the measure, and the predicted value from the model. The model is being tested for how well its predicted values correspond or fit with the observed values across all of the persons in the sample. That is, how close overall do the predicted values from the model come to the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure? So, question: what is meant by the model? What is meant by the model? I'll just look at each of you, and I'm hoping this whole thing is working for Christina, and she's there as well. So that'd be 4. Let's keep looking at you until you give me your best shot at this. Oh, what? Okay, well, it certainly does do that. It certainly does do that. So that is a good answer. The model does make a prediction, and that's always a good answer to give, because that's what models do, man. They make predictions. So if you want to say one thing about the model, say the model makes predictions, because that's what it does. So I like that answer. What does the model consist of, essentially or basically? We went over the details of the model earlier, and we saw the constant was in there, and we saw it has the regression coefficients, regression coefficient for each of the predictor variables in the model, and those regression coefficients are very important because their estimation defines the model. But in the end, what's important about that model is the information that is in it. If that's good information as it pertains to the outcome variable construct, you'll have a good predictive model. But if that information isn't relating to that outcome variable construct, you're not going to have a good predictive model. So essentially, what is important about that model is the information that it has in it about people in your sample, about each person in your sample. And when we understand the information that a model contains about people in your sample, that's represented by what? What contains that information? That information is represented by wonderful. Wonderful. So if you've got predictor variables having to do with different aspects of personality, the information you have on people is their personalities. If you have information about people regarding various perceptions of their supervisors, then you have information about perceptions of one supervisor in different respects, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that set of scores on the predictor variable measures that represents the information that you have about people in your model. And then based on that information, how well can the model predict how people score on the outcome variable measure? Okay, great. Or to put it the way I have here, the model is the set, so understood together, of predictor variables that you are testing embedded within the regression equation. And the information that they represent. Okay. Checking something here quickly. So more on the model as part of that phrase, the fit of the model with the data. So here we have persons 1 through 10. And here we have the outcome variable. And here we have each of these persons' actual observed scores on the outcome variable measure, referred to as the data in this phrase here. Fit of the model with the data. That's the data. Person's actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. But each person actually has two values on the outcome variable measure. The score they actually got in the measure and the score predicted from the model, based on the person's scores on the predictor variable measures, or the information we have about each person on the predictive variables. So here are the predicted values on the outcome variable measure from the model. And that then gives us our three core values. Oh, you see these repeatedly because it's a lot of what it all comes down to. So for person number 1, for example, you have their actual score in the outcome variable measure. In this case, it was 7. Based on their scores on the predictor variable measures, you will have a predicted value or score from the model. And then you'll have a residual, or the error of prediction, how far that predicted value is from the person's actual score on the outcome variable measure. And if in looking down these residuals, they're all pretty small, all heading toward 0. then would people say that we have a good fitting model or a poor fitting model? If these residuals, looking across our 10 people, if they're all pretty small, heading towards 0, then would you say we have a good fitting model or a poor fitting model? That's correct. That means those predicted values coming out of the model are overall coming pretty close to how people are actually scoring on that outcome variable measure, which means that we can tell something about how they're scoring on that outcome variable measure based on the information we have about them in the model. So, indicates a good fitting model. Now again, SPSS is going to give you actual statistics telling you how good of a fit that you have, how good of a predictive model that you have. But you can get a sense of it by examining those residuals. On the other hand, if those residual values are overall large, well, that's indicating that you have a poor fitting model. If those predicted values coming out of the model, in several instances are quite far away from how people are actually scoring on the outcome variable measure. And so the information that you have about people in the model really isn't telling you much about how people score on that outcome variable construct. And so you have a poor fitting model or a model which is not good at prediction regarding the outcome variable construct. And people's different levels on it, higher and lower. So there's 3 core values, important for you to understand, know what they are, know how they relate to each other, and they basically all come down then looked at in terms of how they're relating to each other to answering questions of model fit and how good of a predictive model do you have. So looking at this phrase, the fit of the model with the data, the fit. Each person in the sample has 2 values on the outcome variable measure. The first value is the person's actual score on the outcome variable measure. This is the score the person obtained on the measure after the person completed the measure and it was scored by the researcher. This is the observed value, which is from the measure, and that is entered into the data set by the researcher. The second value is the model's prediction of the person's score on the outcome variable measure. This prediction is mathematically generated from the model for each person in the sample based on the person's scores on the predictor variable measures within the regression equation. This is the predicted value, which is from the model. The observed values represent reality. That is, the data you actually collected from persons in the sample on the outcome variable measure. The predicted values represent the model which you created with a particular set of predictor variables and is being tested. Now, sometimes what you will see people who teach this do, and it is inaccurate, is that they will hold their hands up like this. So here I have my the people at home who can't see me do this. Yeah, I have my my left hand up and my right hand up, and I'm moving them toward each other. My two hands like this. Okay, and they'll go like this. You know how well the observed values and the predicted values in the model, how close they get to each other. They'll go like this. There's no like this. There's like this. Okay? The observed values are the standard. They're reality. They don't change. Okay? This is what people actually got on the measure. That doesn't change. That's reality. Now, you make all sorts of decisions as to what predictive variables you're going to put in the model, or what type of information you're going to put in the model. And you may put in wackadoodle information into the model. That's got nothing to do with how people would score on that outcome variable measure regarding that particular construct. And so then your predicted values are going to be like way over here. Okay. Now you get some knowledge about theory. You do some, look at the research and the like, and you identify the types of information you want to put in your model that'll actually have something to say about how people score on that outcome variable construct measure. Well, now, those observed values, they're right there. They're the standard. They stay right there. They don't move. But now your predicted values might be considerably closer to those actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. So it's not this, both of them moving toward each other. The observed values, that's reality. That's the rock. Now it's a matter of how good is that information you have in your model in terms of the predictive variables in your model for predicting scores on the outcome variable measure. So your observed values stay steady. Not as good information, the predicted values are farther away. Better information, the predicted values are closer. It's the predicted values that vary in terms of how close they are to those observed values. The observed values represent reality, the standard against which the predicted values are evaluated. So if you're ever in a training or hearing from somebody say, oh, it's like this, tell them to relax one of their arms. Stop that one, just do this one, having to do with the predicted values. For all of the persons in the sample, the regression analysis compares the predicted values from the model with the actual observed values from the outcome variable measure to see how close the predicted values come to the observed values. In making this comparison, the regression analysis determines for each person how far off the predicted value is from the observed value, or the error in prediction. Errors in prediction are known as the residuals. The residuals. Across all of the persons in the sample, the closer the predicted values come to the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure, then the better the fit of the model with the data. And the better the fit of the model with the data. Models with smaller residuals, smaller errors in prediction overall have a better fit with the data than models with larger residuals, larger errors in prediction overall. Models where overall the predicted values come close to the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure, small residuals overall, are said to fit well with the data, or to be a good fit, are said to be good predictive models. Good fitting models provide a good explanation of variance on the outcome variable measure, of higher and lower scores on the outcome variable measure. In terms of, understood in terms of person scores on the predictor variable measures. That is, in terms of information about persons, given their scores on the predictor variables. So, for example, information about personality, information about workplace experiences, information about emotional intelligence, information about perceptions of supervisors, etc., etc. Models where overall the predicted values are substantially different from the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure, large residuals overall, are said to not fit the data well, or to be a poor fit, to be poor predictive models. Poor fitting models provide a poor explanation of variance on the outcome variable measure and are not useful. They are not useful to us because they predict poorly. And in regression, we're all about predicting well. So we like good fitting models, models that predict well. Okay, so what is meant by the fit? What is meant by the fit? Here I go again, looking across the room and putting each one of you on the spot. Right, that's it. Excellent. How well does the model fit with the data? How close overall do those predicted values from the model, that's those predicted values that represent the model, come to the actual observed scores on the outcome variable measure? That's the data. So how good of a fit do you have with the model with the data? How close to those overall predicted values come to the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure? That's the question of the fit. Excellent. And then is ultimately a question then of how good of a job does your model do at prediction? The better the fit, the better of a job at prediction. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to play a game. There was a time I was told that it was good to have games during statistics class to help with student engagement. So this was the only one I was able to develop. I think I used to hum the tune Jeopardy or something. Jeopardy tune. I'll do it. Go da 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 da. Okay. So the name of this game, we're not going to play it right now. We're going to have a break. But it's going to be, let's play good fit or poor fit. Cool. So let's play good fit or poor fit. Da 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 da. Okay, here we go. Very good. So the question here is looking at these 10 participants and looking at our 3 core values. So here we see them again. So we have the observed value on the outcome variable measure for the data for each of our 10 participants. And then we have the predicted value on the outcome variable measure from the model for each of our 10 participants. And then we have the residual or the error prediction. There's some volume happening here in terms of a computer. Okay, great. Okay, so there are 3 core values, and based on those, we'll be able to make a determination just based on our own observation here, not statistically, but just based on what we're seeing as to good fit or poor fit, in terms of our opinion of that. Now, in doing that, you'll want to do an evaluation of the residuals, and you should look at the unstandardized residuals. What's in parentheses are the standardized residuals. So you want to look down these unstandardized residuals for the 10 participants. And a way you can evaluate this is understanding that the range of possible scores on the outcome variable measure is 1 to 10 for this example. So the largest possible unstandardized residual is 9. So if someone had an observed value of 10 and the predicted value coming out of the model was 1, and you can only get the range of possible scores you have in the outcome variable measure is 1 to 10. So you're not going to be below a 1, you're not going to be above a 10. Then your residual is going to be 9. Or if the actual observed score was a 1 and the predicted value coming out of the model was a 10, then again, your residual is going to be 9. So the largest possible unstandardized residual that you can get is 9. That's the largest error in prediction that you can get. That's useful information because when you're looking at each of these unstandardized residuals, you can ask yourself, well, how close are they to 9? The largest possible residual. Here we go, one that is 9. Oh, look at that. 1 observed value on the outcome variable measure. 10 was the predicted value out of the model. The largest possible error in prediction is 9. Got it for participant 8. So you're looking at each of these and you're saying, okay, how close is it to 9? You're saying, okay, so overall, how close are these residuals to 9? Because the closer they are to 9, then the larger you can consider the residual to be. That's as opposed to residuals that are closer to 0, then those are smaller residuals. So here are 10 participants. Their actual observed values or scores on the outcome variable measure for each of them. The predicted values coming out of the model. and the errors in prediction. And so looking down these residuals, what would people have to say about this model? Is it a good fit with the data or a poor fit with the data? How about other people? Agreeing with that? Poor fit? Okay, very good. I don't know. I'll take a look. Let me see. Just give me a second. I'll take a look at it. Yeah, I have to agree. I would say it'd be a poor fit too. So let's find out. I'm in suspense because I don't know what we're going to see here. Let's find out. Ah, look at that. Perfect. We did it. Okay. Poor fit. That model, based on the information in that model, is doing a poor job at predicting scores on that outcome variable measure. So that information on the model really isn't proven to be too useful for us for prediction. At a poor fit, as indicated by these large residuals overall. Let's do it again. Okay, so examine those residuals, same thing. Do we have a good fitting model or a poor fitting model? Oh, you guys are so good about it. You become lackadaisical in your answers. Yes, yes, well, you never know. It could be a surprise coming. You never know. I agree, though. I have to tell you, I'm looking at these residuals. They look large to me relative to the largest possible residual, which is 9. And this just is a model that doesn't seem to be doing a good job overall at predicting scores on that outcome variable measure. So as a predictive model, it doesn't seem like it's good at prediction. So I agree. I'd say poor fit as well. Let's take a look what we got. Yep, poor fit. We got a model that is not doing a good job at prediction. Poor predictive model. I agree. And well, she has the right answers. Okay, let's do it again. There we go. So take a look at these residuals or these errors in prediction. What is your sense here? Only got 2 choices. And maybe there's a trick here involved in some way. You never know. I'll be so casual. Think about it a little bit. Got a good fit or a poor fit? You're saying good fit? Okay, all right. Okay, let me see if I agree with you or not. Let me take a look at it. Yeah, those look like they're pretty darn. There's one here. We got prediction was right on what the person actually scored on the outcome variable measure. We're not, really concerned about what happens with a particular participant. We're interested in the overall picture, but still, that's, look at that, right on. Yeah, those values are pretty darn close to 0 overall. So that model, based on the information that we have on people in that model, it's doing a good job. It's getting darn close at predicting how people are actually scoring on the outcome variable measure. In terms of these higher and lower scores on the outcome variable measure and on the construct. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a good fit. We have a good predictive model here. Take a look. Fantastic. Good fit. Love that. Fantastic. We need to go into a lightning round or something, so we can start discerning people here in terms of your ability to detect a good fitting model, because we're all flying high with that currently. Okay. So why do we want models that fit well with the data? Why do we want good fitting models? Oh, I know, you thought it was a question. It's just an introduction to the topic. Though I'm interested, why do we want good fitting models? So were you starting to say something, Gabrielle? Or who was starting to say that? No, Vanessa, go. Yeah, right. Exactly. We like models that predict well. Multiple regression, that's what it is all about. Models that predict well, building models that predict well, finding models that predict well. So I agree. So we're gonna build on that idea, but that is absolutely correct. Models that fit well with the data tell us something about the people in our sample that we can then infer back to the population. The better a model fits with the data, then the better of a job it does explaining or predicting variance on the outcome variable measure. Higher and lower scores on the outcome variable measure. Models that fit well with the data do a good job explaining variance on the outcome variable measure. Models that fit poorly do not. Good fitting models explain variance on the outcome variable measure in terms of the predictor variables that are in the model, in terms of the information that we have on people that is in the model. So this is good prediction bounded by and in terms of the information that we have on people in the model. Embedded within the regression equation, the set of scores on the predictor variable measures represent information we have about persons on the basis of which the model makes predictions. And I really want you to appreciate that, because it's easy to get, muddled up in your mind with those scores on the predictor variables and all. It comes down to representing things we know about people, information we have on people, and how well we can use that as a basis of prediction in terms of where they stand on some other construct. So it's not just all a matter of these scores, but what they represent, what we know about people. If we know this about people, what does that have to tell us about their having higher or lower levels on some construct, like organizational commitment or job satisfaction or job engagement or their level of turnover intentions? Whatever that outcome variable construct may be, if we have this information on people in our model represented by the predictive variable scores, but ultimately it's information we have on people in the model, how much does that have to tell us about some construct represented by the outcome variable measure in terms of people being at higher or lower levels of it? So it's that information we have on people in the model that is really essential here. And yes, it is represented by the predictive variable scores, but think about what that has to say about the information we have in the model. That's more important, actually. For example, if a good fitting model is comprised of predictor variables representing different personality characteristics, so you should look at those predictor variables and ask yourself, what information is this giving us about people? In this case, we have predictor variable scores representing different personality characteristics. And so overall, it's telling us something about persons' personalities. And we want to know on that basis, how well can we predict an outcome variable construct like job satisfaction and people being at higher and lower levels of job satisfaction, or higher and lower levels of counterproductive work behavior, or whatever it may be. Then variance on the outcome variable measure would be explained or predicted in terms of aspects of persons' personalities. The model would tell us what characterizes the personality of persons who score higher on the outcome variable measure, and what characterizes the personality of persons who score lower on the measure. But if a good fitting model is comprised of scores on child rearing variables, then variance, higher and lower scores on the outcome variable measure would be explained or predicted in terms of how persons were raised as children. So, that information you have in the model, those are the terms in which you're doing your prediction. Assuming that the measure of the outcome variable is reliable and valid. So you remember we talked about that last time. It's really important that you capture the construct on the outcome variable, which you need to do with your measure. And if only if you have a reliable and valid measure are you going to capture that outcome variable construct and represent it well. So assuming that the measure of the outcome variable is reliable and valid, then a model that does a good job explaining or predicting variance on the outcome variable measure is also, and more importantly, doing a good job explaining or predicting variance among persons on the outcome variable construct. That is helping to explain why people vary, not just varying in scores now on measures, but why people vary on some personal quality or characteristic, such as organizational commitment, job satisfaction, turnover intentions, counterproductive work behaviors, leadership effectiveness, or job engagement. The list goes on. So an example of a good fitting model, a model that predicts well, and what it means. So let's say that the outcome variable is organizational commitment. That's the construct that we want to predict people's level on, or degree to which people have it. And the model is comprised of predictor variables from the 5-factor approach to personality. So the model is comprised of information about people's personalities, represented by this set of predictor variable scores. So the model is comprised of the following 5 predictor variables. These are all different factors of the 5-factor model of personality: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotional stability. The sample consists of 100 persons. Probably want a larger sample size than that, but we'll go with 100 persons, who are each given a stack of 6 measures to complete. So we're going to do this old school, walk into a room of persons, want to collect data. Well, we hand each person a stack of 6 measures to complete. 1 measure for the outcome variable, and 1 measure for each of the 5 predictor variables. And we wait. Now, you might think you'll be waiting a while for them to finish those, fill filling out, completing those 6 measures, but you won't. Do you know the amount of time that I've seen in different surveys people take to answer each question on these measures? Anybody want to say each item? 10 seconds? More thoughtful people take 10 seconds, yeah. Yeah, I've seen it as low as 3 seconds. I don't even know how that happens. And I mean, I don't even think people are looking at the item then. That's too fast. More like around 6, 7 seconds. So you're not going to be waiting that long. But 6, 7 seconds is okay. People are moving, but they're okay. They're reading the item and then looking at the choices or looking on the scale they have to respond on for each item. So that's okay, 6, 7 seconds. But you got a regular Socrates if they're taking 10 seconds. Let me tell you right now. Okay. That's pretty good. So people fill out all the measures, hand them back to you, and you score them. The regression analysis indicates that the predicted values from the model come close overall to the actual observed values from the outcome variable measure. The size overall of the residuals, errors in prediction, is small, indicating a model that fits well with the data. Okay, good. So you got a good fitting model. The model does a good job at prediction. This good fitting model does a good job explaining or predicting variance on the organizational commitment outcome variable measure. In terms of personality characteristics, the model helps explain why some people score higher on the outcome variable measure and other people score lower on the measure. Since the measure is reliable and valid, the model, in terms of personality characteristics, helps explain why some people, so now away from how people are scoring on the measure, higher or lower, but helps explain why some people have higher levels of organizational commitment, that construct or personal quality, and other people have lower levels of organizational commitment. So variance or varying among people. Perhaps the regression analysis finds that people who are higher in openness to experience, conscientiousness, and emotional stability tend to have higher levels of organizational commitment than people who are lower in those personality characteristics. Don't know if that's true, by the way. I just thought that up. That might be the case, you know, who knows? But don't think, oh gosh, where am I in personality? Don't do that. That information can be used to better understand organizational commitment in terms of what influences it, affects it. This is regression for explanation purposes. Or, for example, the now validated model. So we took those predicted values, we put them up against the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. They're coming pretty close. The model is now validated. It does a good job at predicting scores on the outcome variable measure. Okay, well, now we can take it out into the world. We can apply it to people, like applying for a job. And we can give them now just the predictive variable measures and predict what their organizational commitment levels are for a job that perhaps we're thinking about hiring them for. But before you can start giving people predictive variable measures for the purpose of prediction, you got to validate the model first. We're talking about validating the model here. And once we find that those predicted values coming out of the model are coming close overall to how people are actually scoring on the outcome variable measure, we can now take that model on the road. And we can find people, for example, applying for a job. We don't know what their organizational commitment is going to be like after they're hired on the job 6 months later, let's say. But we'd like to have people who we hire be at higher levels of organizational commitment. So we'll give them these predictor variable measures, which we found we can have confidence in how they predict organizational commitment and have that enter into our decisions as to who we hire. But you got to validate the model first. You can't just give them any predictor variables without knowing how well they predict. So here we're talking about how to validate a model for prediction purposes. So that now the validated model can later be applied to a pool of persons applying for a job with a company to predict these persons' likely level of organizational commitment if the person was hired to work at the company. That's regression for prediction purposes. What is regression best used for between the two? Let me answer the question for you. Right here. It does a so-so job at this. So-so. Does a great job at this. So, in your reading field, he'll kind of sometimes talk about regression explaining things about outcome variable constructs. He'll also at other times talk about regression predicting people's scores on some outcome variable measure or predicting some quality that people have represented by represented as an outcome variable or some outcome of the information that you have about them from the predictor variables, what it predicts about them in terms of some personal quality. You'll see both representations in field. Regression for explanation purposes, so-so. Regression for prediction purposes and validating predictive models that can then be used in the future with people, making predictions about people and decisions about people. Regression for prediction purposes and building good predictive models. Does a great job at that. So-so on the explanation, really good on the prediction.